Hi, and welcome back to Student Nurses Success. We're going to talk about our stress concept map part 2. In this video, we're going to cover the neurohormonal mediators that are part of the body's stress response. It will be very important for you to understand what each one does and how each one affects the body. Because as you remember, prolonged stress and prolonged output of these mediators can eventually cause illness or disease in the body. So let's go ahead and start with our blank template. These neurohormonal mediators are released during the alarm or fight or flight stage of the stress response. The first set we should talk about are the catecholamines. The catecholamines include norepinephrine and epinephrine. Now remember, your hypothalamus is what senses stress, and the hypothalamus signals the release of cortical-releasing hormone, which then activates the sympathetic nervous system. When the sympathetic nervous system is activated, the body puts out the catecholamines norepinephrine and epinephrine. Now, let's talk about what norepinephrine does. Norepinephrine is a vasoconstrictor. So it vasoconstricts the blood vessels, and that vasoconstriction increases your blood pressure for fight or flight. Norepinephrine also decreases gastric secretions, which is probably why you feel a little sick to your stomach when you are in fight or flight. You're actually really not digesting food during that time. We also know that norepinephrine dilates pupils and actually increases your vision. So it makes you a little bit more sharper in your visual field. Now, epinephrine, which is released from your adrenal medulla, your adrenal glands sit on top of your kidneys. Epinephrine increases myocardial contraction, so it makes your heart pump harder. It also increases your heart rate. It increases your cardiac output. And we know epinephrine is a bronchodilator. So it opens up your airways so that you can get more oxygen in. It also increases glucose release from your liver. And this helps increase your blood sugar so that you have more energy. Now let's talk about antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. ADH is also released from the pituitary during stress. Now, ADH helps your body hold on to fluid. And that holding on to fluid increases your fluid volume, which also increases your blood pressure. And it also does some vasoconstriction as well. All of these are helpful during fight or flight. Next are your adrenal cortical steroids. Your adrenal cortical steroids include cortisol and aldosterone. Now, cortisol is activated by ACTH, which your hypothalamus also releases. And cortisol actually stimulates something called glyconeogenesis. Now, glyconeogenesis is just a really big term for the release of energy from the liver. So glyconeogenesis actually just increases your blood sugar, and that gives you energy. We also know that cortisol increases protein synthesis, which will give you energy. It increases your appetite to get you more energy. And it's also immunosuppressive. So it lowers your immune response. Now that could be dangerous if it's long-term you're putting out cortisol. and it's also anti-inflammatory. We know prednisone is an analog for cortisol, which is why we use it a lot for patients because it has a lot of anti-inflammatory properties. However, when you give a lot of glucocorticoids, cortisol, prednisone, those types of steroids to patients, it does lower their immune response because it is immunosuppressive. So it leaves them open for illnesses, infections. Now, aldosterone is secreted by the adrenal cortex too. And what aldosterone does is it promotes the reabsorption of sodium, which also makes water come along. Whenever you have sodium, water comes along with it. And when we reabsorb both sodium and water, what that does is it actually helps increase our blood pressure and blood volume. Now, if we're reabsorbing sodium and water and increasing our blood volume and increasing our blood pressure, we're also decreasing our urine output. Now, there's also some other neurohormonal mediators. Endorphins, we know those are natural painkillers. And so our body releases endorphins to help us during fight or flight. We know cytokines are helpful in the short term for immune function. However, long term, they become a problem. We know that estrogen actually decreases during stress, which actually lowers reproduction. I mean, there's no need to reproduce during times of stress. Testosterone actually increases blood pressure, increases heart rate, increases strength. And I'm going to jump down here and talk about oxytocin, which has a little bit more of a calming analgesic effect. This is why actually male and female may react differently to stress because of these hormones. We know growth hormone is helpful in tissue repair during fight or flight. And prolactin actually also helps immune function. So all of these things are actually really helpful during short-term stress. However, if the stress response goes on too long, you can see where when you continue to put out norepinephrine and epinephrine, you develop things like high blood pressure, hypertension. And you can also see when you're putting out too much cortisol all the time, you can see why you have actually developed diabetes from increased blood sugar, and why patients then start to get sick when they're under a lot of stress because it lowers their immune response. So these things are great short term, but long term, they end up causing more trouble. Now, physical indicators of stress can all be linked to these neurohormonal mediators, and these physical indicators increase blood pressure, increase heart rate, increased respiratory rate. Right there, we can see the heart rate and respiratory rate are probably due to epinephrine. The increased blood pressure is probably due to ADH, aldosterone, and norepinephrine. Other indicators of stress are muscle tension, sweating, cold extremities, probably from vasoconstriction, fatigue, maybe upset stomach from the norepinephrine and the decrease of the gastric secretions. and hyperglycemia from increased cortisol and increased epinephrine, also known as increased blood sugar. So you can start to see again how this prolonged and chronic stress leads to diseases such as high blood pressure, heart disease, diabetes, and other illnesses. And again, it becomes important to manage our stress and desensitize our body to stress so we don't develop wear and tear from the stress. And so here's our completed map. And remember, you can find a copy of the maps on our Etsy site. The link is in the comments. Thanks for joining me today. Now go out for a nice relaxing walk or hit the gym and manage that nursing school stress.